Welcome to Work Inspired. It's your host, Kimberly. Today, we're going to have a unique conversation with Kyle Yardley at BKV Group. We're going to be talking about communities with rural jails in them and how a small change can impact the larger community at hand. Work Inspired starts right now. Kyle, thank you so much for being here. We're excited to have you on the show. Could you please tell us your professional story?
My professional story. So it's kind of interesting. I grew up in Texas, and when I graduated from college, I did something kind of crazy in hindsight. I just threw everything in my car with $300 in my pocket, scared to death, and I drove out to Los Angeles. Did not have a job. And this was 1988. We didn't have the internet back then. We didn't have cell phones. So I found myself, sitting in a motel in Santa Ana, California, making cold calls to architecture firms to find a job. Fortunately, I did. Within a week, I was working. And, what an incredible journey working in Los Angeles, as a furniture, vendor. You would appreciate. I was working with a group that came from SOM, and so we were very intensive in design. We were designing everything, doing competitions, winning competitions, almost everything that we would go after, and then doing projects all around the country. The level of fit and finish and detail was incredible. We were designing furniture. I worked with Lauren Rote. I don't know if you know her, but she's designing furniture in our lobbies and carpets, and we're designing, light fixtures with lighting consultants and, every level of design that you could imagine. Mm-hmm. So that sort of set the stage for when I ended up moving to Colorado and began working on justice and civic projects. So I took a lot of what I learned in Los Angeles for my first 10 years, really began developing projects with a lot of detail, a lot of fit and finish. And one of the projects that stands out is really my first detention center. So when I was in Colorado, I was designing police stations, courthouses, police and sheriff's facilities, training facilities, and I did a couple of detention centers. But the very first one was in Broomfield, which was the city and county of Broomfield. So it was run by their police department. And I knew nothing about how to design a detention center. We were law enforcement experts, but I had a good program that had been developed by someone else. And what was really interesting is that what was in that program is really a lot of the best practices that we are talking about today. And this was back in 2007. Okay, it was a long time ago. Talking about normative environments and trauma-informed design and trying to develop spaces that would actually rehabilitate rather than make things worse for inmates who come into the facility. We had a day room that had solid core wood doors. We had porcelain toilets. I know this sounds kind of like, okay, so what? But if you've been in a detention center, you'll see that they typically don't have those things. And this place was run very tight. It was a fabulous facility. And what I got out of this was sort of learning that it was very normal. It did not feel like I was in an odd place. It felt more like a mental or like a hospital. And I think for a place where you're trying to recuperate from, crisis, you've been arrested, that's probably a better place to be than some other places.
So flash forward, now you're here in Chicago. Can you tell us about your company and what makes you guys special and unique?
BKV Group is a multidisciplinary firm, and there's a lot of those. So maybe that's unique and maybe it's not. But one of the things that we do for our clients are a lot of studies because, quite often municipalities or counties, don't know what they need. They need someone to come in and help them figure out what their problem is, what the solution is, what it might cost, how long it might take, what are the steps, what's the roadmap to potentially get a project done. We can bring in a whole team of architects, engineers. We can bring in interior designers. We can look at where they're at and analyze it up and down. And so that is something that we will do. We will try to provide a full wraparound service, when we're doing studies. And if we were just an architectural firm, we probably aren't going to go out and hire an engineer to do a study for $5,000. But we can bring our whole team in and provide this much higher level of service. So that's good. We're very collaborative with our clients. We don't design for them. We like to think that we design with them. So our processes are workshop oriented. We sort of establish a process with them. And BKV Group, we've got offices around the country. So, we're able to sort of take the pulse of what's happening in other parts of the country. Leadership is involved in conferences all around the country. They, write white papers and, do seminars and talks. And so we're on top of what trends are, and we can share information between offices and between, areas of expertise that then we can draw upon and bring to our clients. And we love what we do. We're passionate about supporting, our clients and trying to help them find ways to be successful.
So it sounds like you have an amazing depth of resources, right? Especially from this knowledge side. Are there other resources that you have at BKV that have helped you succeed?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously, with the internet now, you can pretty much learn anything that you want to learn if you put yourself to the task. So I would say, being curious and having a drive to always learn is something that's very important. I will say that I learned self-reliance when I was in Los Angeles. My mentor, when I was just a young architect, I would go and ask him, how do I do this, or what do I, do? And he would look at me and get mad and say, Kyle, go figure it out, go look it up. Mm-hmm. And today I think if you did that, people would be offended. But I learned a level of self-reliance from that experience. I pretty much learned within a few months that I could find all the information that I needed to problem solve anything that was thrown at me if I just went and looked it up. Now, today, really one of the most important things that we do is we rely on collaboration. Mm-hmm. Our projects are so complex. They're so personalized. One sheriff might want to do something one way and another wants to do something a different way. So you can't generalize all your solutions. So we have to collaborate with our clients on everything. And again, that goes back to we want to design with them, not design for them, because we don't want to bring a generalized solution to them. So, in terms of resources, it's a combination of everything, a little bit of self-reliance, and a lot of collaboration that we need to do. And certainly the internet's a big part.
Absolutely. What is something you're excited about or looking forward to in the next 12 months? One
of the things that we've been, working on, we've been tinkering with at BKV Group is what we're calling our Rural Jail Initiative. Mm-hmm. So, we've been, looking at rural jails, small counties that have, very special needs. And, how do you problem solve for them? Mm-hmm. And, one of the things that they have trouble with is funding. Another is that they just lack the support and the resources to do what they need to do. And if you really think about it, a small jail has to do everything that a big jail has to do, but they have fewer resources. They have fewer places to put people. They have less money, less staff, and maybe less commitment from the community because they're more conservative. So what we're doing with the Rural Jail Initiative is we thought, well, because maybe 40 to 50% of the people that come into jail nationally, and this is data that you can look up, have behavioral health or mental health issues, and that rural counties, also are limited in terms of the options you have for health care. Let's embed a health clinic with a public safety facility. Okay, so that may sound a little crazy, but if you think about it, half the people coming in need medical health and behavioral health, and the community is underserved. Primary care physicians, dentists, OBGYN, specialists. So if they don't have access to a vehicle to drive across county to a hospital, they're not getting those services. So if you think about it, it kind of makes some sense, I think. And it's not like you're going to jail to go to the health center. They can have different doorways and, position it in a way that they're separate facilities. They're co-located, and they can share resources. So you have a county with limited funds. You can share the maintenance. You can share, the heating and the cooling. You can, share, a party wall, part of the roof, and all the things that make separate buildings more costly. People that come into the facility, inmates that get treated, now have the opportunity for a continuum of care when they leave. They can see the same people that they have been seeing in the facility outside. A lot of times, people come into a facility, they get a little bit of care, then go out and just go back to, because there are no options.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, it can serve the population's needs as well. So we're really trying to reorient the conversation away from a jail to more of a community resource, a facility that serves the community. So the detention center, the jail, has connections within the community to help support programs and services. It's not about holding people, but it's about, improving the community, making it safer. That's something I'm really interested in talking about over the next 12 months.
Well, I think we should dive into it right now. Real jail cells, right? I imagine that they are probably a bit outdated. And not just for inmates, but the staff and communities that they serve. What kind of problems do you think that they face?
It's horrible problems. I mean, think about, a lot of rural jails were built. I mean, I went to one about a year and a half ago that was built in the 1880s.
Wow.
Okay, I mean, if you have to think about, you're riding around on a horse, you have a whole different perspective of the world and what incarceration means. Well, let's just move half a century, closer to where we are now and say, well, in the 1950s, well, that was still a different time. And we still thought about incarceration differently. I mean, it was to punish and hold people, which is fine. Okay, but the problem with a jail is that it's not a prison. So the people that go there aren't going to be there for very long. They're waiting for trial, or they're serving a short sentence. And half of them haven't even been convicted of anything. Maybe they did the crime, maybe they didn't. But they're coming back to the community. What kind of an re-entry do you want to see, when you bring someone into your facility? Do you want them to come into an overcrowded place that is threatening, that is loud, that is unsafe, that is noisy, that causes more anxiety? Again, we're talking about people that some have, mental health and behavioral health issues. We're also talking about people that might have been wrongfully arrested, that are going to be not convicted of something. And then you're talking about, people that just need help. So it's not going to support the kind of outcomes that I think most of us want. I mean, I think if you ask that question, you'll get a different response than if you say, well, do you want a new jail? No one wants a new jail. But we do want better outcomes. And so these old jails, have been around a long time, and many of them are so outdated that they don't even serve, the basic functions of what the sheriff needs to even do their job to protect the public, much less, address dealing with homelessness. You've got, violence, drug addiction, mental health, fear. All those things are rolled up into a detention center or a jail. They have to deal with those. So yes, an old facility is not equipped to handle that.
The first time we had a conversation, you alluded to the fact of the difference between jails and prisons, and I didn't even realize that. I think the public doesn't even quite understand the difference between them. So
yeah, I mean, a prison, you've been convicted of a crime. A jail is a holding place. It's kind of like if you could think about when you were in school. Well, maybe you probably didn't get into trouble, but I did when I was growing up. I'd get sent to the principal's office. That's detention. Or I'd be sent, to the detention after school and have to do my homework. So that was a kind of a lesser level of detention, but it's the same kind of thing. So detention is when you've been arrested for something and you're either waiting for trial or you've been convicted, but it's a minor sentence. So, maybe a misdemeanor or something, or a repeat, could be a DUI, a repeat DUI, or, something. But it's less than a year. And so you're coming back out. How do we want you to be when you come out? Better or worse?
Hopefully
or
better.
The same?
I would think better.
It's easier to kind of look the other way and just say, well, that's a building that we're housing people in. It's on the edge of town, and don't bring it any closer to my backyard. Keep it out there. But what happens is those people get kicked back out with, and then they repeat. There is data, statistics that show that, 60 to 70% of the people that are arrested are back in jail within 3 years.
Wow.
Okay, so that's a high repeat rate, and that's expensive.
So what do you think's missing in these facilities?
Well, the whole conversation is moving away from, that 1890s, jail, down in the basement of a courthouse where, the sheriff lived and his wife cooked their dinners and they had no daylight and they hung out in little cages, to maybe address some of the bigger social issues that, are related to crime and the things that put people into jails. But it's also, looking at, as I said, what kind of an outcome do you want? So if you hold people in very confined places where there's not much freedom to move around, where it's dark, or maybe it's just artificially lit, where it's noisy, because jails, if they're designed with hard surfaces, are very echoey. If you talk, it echoes and reverberates. Even my voice right now is going to echo throughout a housing unit. That is stressful. And if you can't see the outside or very little daylight, that is stressful. I mean, there's a psychological impact. And you can say, well, okay, that's an impact on the inmates. But if you talk to any sheriff, if you ask them who has the longest sentence, they'll tell you with a little smirk, it's my staff. Because they're in that facility. Maybe they're not there sleeping, but they might have 8 or 12-hour shifts, 5 days out of the week. And that has a human toll. It has an impact on them. Okay, I mean, slowly it wears you down. Okay, it changes the way you look at things. Okay, if you're dealing with the worst people in their worst crises, day in and day out, and the environment that you're in is just enclosing on you and does not feel secure, is not, uplifting, to some level, to the level that you can do it, it's going to wear you down. And it's going to impact the way, it increases aggression, violence. They're less safe, the facilities. So the people that work there, it's less safe for them. Emotionally, it takes a toll, and obviously it takes a toll on the people that are spending the night there as well.
It sounds very similar to topics of conversation that we've recently had, not only about neurodiversity in the workplace, but we did just have a panel about that in healthcare facilities and how access to the proper lighting and proper sound, not just from maybe the inmates, but like you said, the staff is really impactful for them.
Yeah. Well, I was in a jail just doing a tour just earlier this week, and it was a relatively new one, but it was still very dungeon-like. The spaces were noisy. There was very little daylight. And, the officer that was watching everybody was in a central point, a control room, where they could see into all of the different housing units. But he's just sitting there. It's quiet. It's kind of dark. It really felt like not a great place to work. And granted, I realize that a control room needs to probably be dark so you can't see in because of the way you do the glazing and whatever else. But looking through into the housing units, they were also kind of dark or just artificially lit. And, small, not much movement. So, in a way, you could say, well, yeah, it's not a great work environment. I don't think anybody that's not a sheriff's deputy would expect to even work in half of that or a quarter of that kind of an environment. It's a reflection on us, because what we're really saying is, well, you're not that important, okay? And the job you do is not that important. And, we don't like what you do or whatever you might think, but it is important. And it does have an impact on us, and it is a reflection of our values. It's not about being soft on crime or anything. It's just a question of, the people that work there, deserve a good workplace that's reasonable, that feels safe, that is not, doesn't wear them down. But, it's a hard job. We know it's a hard job. So, it's not going to be perfect, but but hopefully your environment can be a little bit uplifting, can give you a little bit of a respite from, the day-to-day things that you may have to do that are very stressful. And older facilities don't have those types of spaces. I mean, I have seen offices where they've literally turned a closet into an office, a CMU block closet that is like, 5 by 8, and they've jammed a desk in there, and that's somebody's office. Okay, that's not workplace design.
Mm-mm. I certainly know that it can't possibly be in a cinder block room with just a desk, and I'm sure lighting's terrible and
Bad
noise is
lighting.
terrible, and
Yeah.
I mean all these factors. So you have to really think about lots of factors when you're creating these new spaces.
Well, poor ventilation.
Oh yeah, we didn't even talk about that.
No or limited access to daylight. Maybe you don't see as much sun. I mean, here in Chicago, it's cloudy a lot, but you might get a small skylight up in in the roof, and that might be it. That's not much daylight.
So rather see clouds than nothing, right?
You have to weigh, because it's not as simple as just saying, okay, I'm just going to put windows everywhere, because obviously windows are not as secure as, a concrete wall, but there's a balance. And in good design, we try to find that proper balance to bring in as much daylight as we can, and sometimes we'll do a lighting analysis and try to make improvements to the design to bring in certain levels of daylight, into a facility, and, bring in an acoustical engineer to, look at, ways that we can, bring down the reverberation and the echo.
So if rural counties are looking to modernize their jails, where do they start? What should they think about outside of just adding more space?
Well, you need to start with the why.
Okay.
I mean, and what I mean by that is, if you go and say, well, what do you need? The answer is, well, I need more space. I need more beds. I need this. You're not going to get that. Okay? I mean, that's the wrong narrative. That's the wrong approach, because these are still buildings, facilities that are owned by the public. So you've got to start there, I think. Okay? Start with a conversation. Okay, it's a conversation with, your county board or county commissioners about what your needs might be. Why do you have those needs? Again, I go back to the question, what are the outcomes that you're trying to achieve that you can't achieve right now? Have a conversation with the community. You can have a public outreach, and get their opinion. Their opinion is going to be, well, I don't want to spend any money, but you talk about what the needs are and what you're trying to do for the community. It's not about the sheriff, it's about the community. And it does then come back and have a positive impact on the sheriff and the staff and the inmates that are in the facility. But it needs to be a community-oriented discussion. You can hire, professionals that specialize in that. They can go bring data. They can, provide supporting evidence. They can build an argument. They can do a study to show the level of deficiency, or if you're not in compliance with code, or if you're not in compliance with standards. So all that can be developed, with very little money to, basically support the conversation. And it usually takes years. I mean, this isn't something where it's like, oh, you're going to get $20 million from a rural, county to build a new facility. I mean, that's a conversation that's going to take a long time. But there is a process, and, there are counties that are doing, upgrades around the country that are small, that find a way because they can generate the support that they need. So that's the way I think you start. You got to change the narrative to what is important to the community. And how are you going to fix the community's problems or address them better? It's more safely. One more thing. I mean, think about it. You have an old, outdated facility, and you're not code compliant, and somebody trips and falls. What do you think is going to happen? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Likewise, you've crammed in too many people because you don't have the the ability to do proper classification. So classification in a jail is I don't have one big holding area for everybody. I'm going to start to say, well, you're dangerous, so you're going to go over here. You're lower risk, so I'm going to put you with other low risk people. You're transgender, well, I'm not going to put you over here because that's going to cause problems. And then there's gender, there's age issues, there's any number of issues. Little jails don't have the ability to have that flexibility of multiple small units, that allow, good management supervision. Something bad happens or you're not in compliance with standards. Again, that's going to basically be the cost of, fixing the problem. And so, sometimes I think, what happens is communities get to an inflection point where they've waited so long because it's a hard conversation and a hard decision to make, but you'll get to a point where you have to do it. Eventually, you'll have to fix and make the change.
And so we talked a little bit about how it can actually improve the mental health and rehabilitation. Can you talk more about that? I think that's really important that we focus when we're creating space on helping.
Someone comes into a jail and they're in a crisis. Okay, in a lot of facilities, there's no place to put them, and there's no services to support them. So you put them in solitary confinement because you've got to take them out of the general population. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, solitary confinement is not the best place for someone in crisis. It's not going to de-escalate the problem. And what's really interesting about these small jails is they know everybody. A small community, everybody knows everybody. Mm-hmm. And they know the offenders. They know them by first name. The people that come in the jail know the officers or the deputies by first name. They know their families. It's personal. It's a perfect opportunity to say, even in a small place, because it can be very personal, let's provide the spaces that can support programs, education, training, reentry, addiction treatment. It's not on the sheriff. The sheriff isn't going to have the funding to pay for all that, but even have just, one multi-purpose space that can, support that. And then, to have some outreach to, community organizations can come in and very often are very willing to come in and try to support people in need. So just even having the space, it's not even much. Mm-hmm. Can go a long way to, move forward in treating that. And so there's a lot of different ways, to address the recidivism. Doing nothing is probably not going to address it. And that may be more costly than trying to, address it a little bit at least.
Well, let's talk about cost. The perception that building a better jail means spending more money. Is that actually true?
It depends on how you look at it.
Yeah.
If I say, I need a new jail, I want to sell you a jail, you're going to say, well, Kyle, how much is it going to cost? I might say, well, I don't know, but, maybe $20 million. And you're going to, oh, we're done. Okay? Yeah. But what if I said, well, how much is your jail costing you right now to operate? And let's talk about, the efficiency of it, because, old buildings are energy hogs. I mean, it's like, think about it. You have an old Model A Ford that you're trying to drive around, you tinker with it, you do maintenance, and maybe it'll get you to the grocery store and back, but you're not going to drive across town or use it as a daily drive. An old jail has similar problems. Systems are failing. They're constantly, needing to be repaired. Roofs leak, equipment's old. It doesn't work. It's not designed for, what you might be doing in the facility. And so you have maintenance issues. You may have drainage issues. You just all sorts of deferred maintenance makes an old facility more expensive to just literally just keep the lights on. And of course, you don't turn the lights off because it's 24/7, 365. Mm-hmm. But these facilities are less efficient to operate too, not just in terms of energy costs, but they a lot of times have long corridors and poor sight lines. They require more staff to manage fewer people. And the biggest cost of a new facility is the staff. Building is, if I say $20 million and you go, oh my God, that's nothing compared to the cost. One position is 5 people in a detention center, okay, because of the rotation and the shifts. and 24/7, 365. I need one person. No, I need five. And now you start to say, okay, well, let's just say that's $70,000. Okay, times five times 20 years. What is that? So the question about cost is, what's it costing you, and do you want to be more efficient? Do you want to be more compact, more efficient? Do you want to be able to provide services that are more modern, that sort of address some of the issues, maybe a long-term view of what's going on? So maybe you're going to address recidivism a little bit because someone comes in 3 times, that's still costing you money. That's expensive. You need more staff, that's expensive. You've got to do repairs, that's expensive. And then there's always that risk and that liability that's hovering over you in a facility that may not be up to standards, may not be code compliant.
What are some of the most innovative features you've designed into modern jails that are making a real difference?
Well, the biggest thing is what we've been talking about is this sort of shift in the narrative of what jails can be. And counties are doing this all over the country. They're moving away from a punitive model to more of a therapeutic, trauma-informed model. Again, it's not get soft on crime and inmates, but it's understanding that the facility is actually safer if you're providing services that are addressing some of the needs of people that are coming into the facility. And it's also safer for the staff. So, we've learned that the data is showing that that's not only reducing some of the recidivism, but it's reducing the liability in the facility, and it's providing a better workplace for staff, and it's providing a better place for inmates. Other things, that we've kind of touched on, classification. That's been around for decades, but the early old jails didn't have spaces to house people with different types of needs, special needs, gender, high risk, low risk, dangerous, violent, nonviolent. Somebody that's in jail for shoplifting is shouldn't be in with somebody that is maybe in jail for armed robbery or physical violence, assault or something else.
Sure.
So it's just going to cause problems,
Yeah.
right? And it's hard to manage, and it's not safe for some of the inmates. So the classification is a big deal. And we've talked about the obvious things, daylighting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why is daylighting not in old jails? Because you can break through, glazing. It's not secure. And so there's a push against daylighting. We now have glazing that is relatively secure, that takes, an hour of hitting it with a sledgehammer to break through. Is that still as secure as a concrete wall? No. But we do have the ability to glaze in a thoughtful manner that can address those concerns and still maintain good security in a facility.
Mm-hmm.
No fresh air.
Yeah.
That's again, these are obvious things, but what we're really trying to do is say, to what extent can we move the design toward a more normative environment, like that detention center that I did in 2007 in Broomfield, where we had, solid core wood doors, vinyl tile flooring. We had, porcelain toilet fixtures. It was more normal. I wouldn't say it's completely normal. And we had access to lots of daylight and outdoor recreation. So, those things were important. They still had all the other spaces. So you backed up, you go over here. It's all concrete. Do you want to be there? You want to be over here where you get some sunshine, you see some color, and it feels a little bit more like, a normal place to be, less like you're in jail and more like being in a hospital. It was interesting in Broomfield because at that time I had little kids, and the big thing in Colorado at the time was this sort of love and logic, which was a process of sort of managing your children, letting them have consequences and whatever. Now, I think today we've moved past all that, but what was interesting is that in that detention center, they were doing things similar. They weren't calling it that, but they were saying, yeah, you come in here, you misbehave, you go over here, you act a little better, you get into this unit, you're a little better, you get over here. Oh, you're even better, we'll let you go into the alternative sentencing, and eventually you can go out into work release, and
Hmm.
and you get more privileges. And I was just thinking, well, this is exactly what I'm doing with my kids. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
this is happening in a jail. This feels normal.
I'm sure they really appreciated the fact that they could see some daylight, and they had those solid wood doors and the porcelain, and they could get to better spaces with better behavior. And I'm sure the result at the end for that community was a much better, healthier population, and hopefully people not repeating.
I like to think so. I mean, I've
Yeah.
heard stories and talking to every jail administrator or sheriff, but still, you do things to minimize
Mhm.
those incidents.
Yeah,
And that makes it better for everybody,
absolutely.
even the community.
Yeah.
It's sort of indirect, but it does.
Everyone in there, someone's brother, sister, mother,
And they're
daughter,
going
right?
and they're going to re-enter.
Yeah.
So how do you want them to re-enter?
Yeah.
You know, and do you want them to have a support structure or not?
Hmm.
If they don't, they're going to be right back in. It's just going to be a repeat.
Yeah, I love the idea that you guys are putting in some of the mental health and the healthcare facilities within.
So those are things that are kind of new. Technology's obviously changing.
Mhm.
We're seeing more. Like video court and video visitation, where you can get on a phone and just call. So the idea of limiting movement of inmates, if an officer or a deputy's got to take an inmate down a hallway out of the unit, then there's a level of unpredictability. Okay, so that raises the risk for the staff. And potentially, for the inmates. So, technology's good. I've even seen, I saw one facility where they were handing out tablets
Oh.
and headphones. I mean, you could say, well, yeah, there's pros and cons to that. Tablets are expensive, whatever. But the flip side is, I don't have to have a TV on that's echoing in the space. You can have your own programming off your tablet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's control. I mean, you don't have internet access.
Yeah.
But, and you can watch things, quietly and without bothering others. So, I mean, there's pros and cons. I think we're moving toward that. I mean, I know we're moving toward that in schools, giving laptops that are already preloaded with, all your textbooks. I'm sure we're going to be doing that, at some point, in jails.
I know my children both have a laptop with their textbooks on it, right? And it allows them to have it with them to learn and grow at their own pace. So it makes perfect sense why you'd want something like that.
Well, it also motivates you to behave.
Yeah.
Because you can take it away.
Yeah.
And go move them over to this other unit where you sit.
Consequences, right?
There are consequences to bad behavior.
Yeah.
And that's what we all have to learn to be productive in society.
So one of the things when we were talking recently was about this, maybe the stigma of I've got to walk into a jail and I'm also walking into healthcare. I'm also walking into the sheriff's office. How do you guys help that situation?
We've been, working on some prototype designs, just playing around and testing the idea. One design, has you coming into a public entry, a public lobby with a community room, a healthcare center, and an entry into the sheriff. The jail entry is to the back. Another idea would be to say, no, if that's a problem, you enter into the health center, kind of the community public side. The sheriff's entry's on another, on the other side of the building.
Sure.
You don't have to, it doesn't have to be, well, I'm going to go to the sheriff's department to go to public health.
Yeah.
They share a party wall that you don't even know exists and allows the staff to move back in and out to not only provide health care to inmates, but to provide needed health care to the community in a clinic. Maybe you don't have a Walgreens or a CVS pharmacy to get shots, or you have to drive somewhere and you're just not going to do it. So this gives you the ability to do it in its own kind of public community resource environment.
Absolutely.
That's what we're looking at.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
And you don't have to put in the healthcare. You could do the detention, or the jail. You can break it up into components. But we just think that this idea that when you start to wrap the response into, community needed services, you're actually opening up the opportunity to get more community support. Okay, you can get organizations that are more interested. It feels more transparent. You obviously have to talk to the community before you do that, and you open yourself up to more opportunity for grants and funding. Okay, it's not a jail.
Yeah.
It's a public safety facility that serves the community, their health, well-being, and their safety.
So looking forward, right? We're thinking 10, 20 years down the line. What do you think the future of this is going to be?
Well, we're moving in this direction. We're going to keep moving in it.
Yeah.
You can grudgingly say, nope, I'm not going to do it. And you can wait for the next administration to come in. Eventually, somebody's going to do it. It's like I said, you'll eventually get to an inflection point where either the risk is too great, or you have an incident and you have to do it, or whatever. It was interesting. I was at a conference for the Illinois Sheriff's Association just last week, and we met this guy that does risk management for about half the counties. And we had an interesting conversation because he said, well, yeah, we go around and we assess the different jails. And if they've got problems, we tell them what they are and they need to fix them. I mean, we can say, you know what? We can't insure you anymore.
Interesting.
If you don't fix this problem.
Yeah.
And so, it's kind of food for thought. It was interesting because eventually any old jail will get to that point. The question is, you may not be there. You may have 10 years, you may have 20 years before you get there. You're still taking a human toll on your staff. Even if it's like, well, it's not about the inmates, then it should be about your staff. And it should be about what's happening in the community when the people come back out and they keep, offending. And there's, no attempt to work on that. You have a captive audience when you have someone in the facility. Organizing with community leaders on, what kind of support can be provided and having some space for that support. That leads to diversion, programs, there's reentry, there's crisis prevention and, treatment and education that can go on that, outside organizations, can support and provide.
So with everything we've been talking about today, I'm certain there's going to be someone listening who's like, what is my very first step? Where do I even go? What do I do? How do I start the community talking about this conversation?
You got to start the conversation.
Yeah.
Conversation has to be started. I mean, you can't start it by saying, I need a new jail, because the answer is going to be no.
Yeah. Fair.
Okay. If I say that to 100 people, I'm going to get 100 no's. Okay.
Yeah.
How much is it going to cost? No. Okay, you've got to start the conversation. The sheriff can start the conversation with the, county board or the commissioners who write the checks. Here are the problems I'm having. No. Okay. You can go out and hire somebody to provide data to support, what issues you're having and what the risks are. Okay, that's interesting, but still no. Okay.
Lots of no's so far.
You can, have public outreach sessions and talk to the community. What community, what kind of outcomes do you want? Okay, here are the things that we're seeing. We see that half the people that come in here come back out, but, they keep breaking in or stealing or shoplifting or, doing drugs, on your corner or, whatever. I mean, is that a problem? There is data that shows that can be addressed, can't be fixed, but we can provide the backdrop so that it can allow some of that to reduce and lessen, some of that behavior when they get out. Is that important? They have that conversation. You got to get buy-in from the community. The community is going to go back to the commissioners and say, well, we elected you. We have this problem. I mean, it may take years.
Yeah.
It's not a quick, but you've got to start with that conversation. Now you can hire an architect that can do a study. They can tell you what level of deficiency you have based on your current operational needs. They can go space by space and say, well, this is what is, kind of the national standard.
Mm-hmm.
This is what you're lacking. Here's how you're having to make do. Here's the risk that you have. Here are your workarounds. The sheriff knows all that. But if he goes to, or they go to the board, it's like, no.
Mm.
Okay. But, you can hire somebody, you can provide data and build the argument to the community. And slowly, if it's important, if the narrative is rephrased to reflect the values that the people have, and I know this, sounds nuts, okay? It sounds Chicago-ish, okay? I'm not trying to be, but
No, yeah.
But the reality is you will, at some point it's going to be obvious, what's it costing? Oh, you had an incident, okay, you have an incident every month. Okay, well, at what point is that going to flare up and become, a lawsuit?
Mm-hmm.
When do you get to that inflection point where you have to do something? Are you going to wait until something, pushes you over the cliff to where you have to do it? Or are you going to proactively start? I think you can do that. Have the conversation. It doesn't cost anything. It's a little bit of time. You get valuable input and you prime the pump. Okay? Because the first answer is going to always be no. But you keep priming the pump, eventually you're going to get enough in the carburetor and there's going to be a little spark.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be, well, how can we do that? Well, you know what? We have ways of working. USDA can provide, grants to rural communities. They can provide low-cost loans. Even a small community, something amortized over 20 years might only be, $10 or something per person. It's not like a big, but it's just, again, how you package it.
Yeah.
And those, that funding is available. We have to go out and find it, and you have to sell to the community.
Sounds like there's a lot of communities that could use this benefit and start kind of,
I think
as you
so.
said, start picking at that thread and
I
seeing
think
what
so.
they can do.
In Illinois, everyone is so tax burdened.
Mm.
It's really unfair, and to the amount of property taxes, nobody wants to raise their taxes.
Of course.
So the conversation's got to be, well, how do we solve the community problems?
Yeah.
In this proposition?
Start
And
picking at that thread now.
And how do we do it efficiently?
Yeah.
And the community, tell us, we can tell you what we need if I'm the sheriff, but here's the problems.
Mm-hmm.
Is this okay? Is this acceptable? No, it's not acceptable. Okay, well, here's what we need to do.
Yeah.
These projects only you'll have the opportunity only every 30, 40, 50 years. Okay. I mean, the opportunity, if you haven't done it, is now to start that, build that legacy, make that change for your staff and for the community.
Especially if they haven't in 30 or 40 years.
Because you don't build a new facility and then build another one in 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, they're usually around 50 years before you start thinking about, well, I need a new facility or I need to make changes.
And it sounds like you guys are really thinking about how to help, not just now, but 30, 40 years down the line. What's going to make an impact on the people in the space, as well as the employees that have to work there, the sheriff, right? No more is the sheriff's wife cooking in the basement. Hopefully there's a better path forward for food, but definitely let's have this conversation, start it now, because by the time you get going and the time you really get this done, you're going to be with it for so long.
Yeah. Well, and you asked, what am I interested in doing, the next 12 months? And that's what I'm interested in doing is starting up that conversation.
Well, I love to hear that. And I love this specialized field for you, right? It is something that I think can make such a human impact. And I'm sure that resonates with your soul deep down, right? Like you're making a difference for lots of people.
Well, if you could change the trajectory of just one person going into a jail, you could have a huge impact on the broader society, the community. And someone else comes in and goes out and continues to offend for, the rest of their life. I mean, compare the two. Just even one person is a huge impact. I mean, that's a bigger impact than I can have designing an office building. I can have a potential impact that I think could be more profound.
Mm-hmm. Well, you are having an impact, and hopefully there'll be more that follow your footsteps. So if, as someone who is listening to this and maybe thinks, well, how do I make an impact like you have? What would be your advice for future leaders out there?
Do it.
Yeah.
Get out and, be an advocate for it. Let that be, something you're passionate about,
Mm-hmm.
because, no one else is going to do it if you don't, right? I mean, we have to take that initiative and try to be advocates for positive change in our communities.
Absolutely.
I think, what happens in jails and sheriffs is you just get beaten down.
Mm.
And you just say, well, I'm just going to continue to go in here and just going to react to the people that come into the facility. I'm not going to be proactive in trying to make it better. And, over years and years and years of that, that's the lens that you look at the world. And it's it's kind of a depressing lens if you think about it. Doesn't have to be.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can, be excited about it and say, well, there is the possibility to do something. What can we do? And let's start with, what are the outcomes that we want to have here? And what do we do that has an impact on those? And anyone can be an advocate for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I feel like I learned so much today. My eyes are very much more open to what's going on in this world. And I'm so excited to see what you guys create, what you create for these customers. And hopefully we get to hear a bunch of wonderful success stories coming up, and you can share back with BOS at a later date some of the findings and how this has changed the world. Thank you so much, Kyle.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate our show. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Work Inspired podcast so that you don't miss any of the incredible guests we have planned for upcoming episodes. We'll continue to find the best and brightest minds in business so that you can learn, grow, and succeed, and so that we can all work inspired. Work Inspired is brought to you by BOS, a leader in commercial working environments and a Hayworth best-in-class dealership. Experience our 360 approach and discover the team, tools, and techniques required to navigate the complexity of your next workspace at BOS.com. If you have ideas, feedback, or would like to be featured on our show, please email podcast@BOS.com. Thank you for listening. This has been a Workspace digital production. If you're interested in launching a podcast at your organization, please email info@workspace.digital for a free consultation.